Hey everyone, and welcome back to the GetWellbe podcast. This podcast is designed to arm you with the knowledge and awareness you need to get and stay well your whole life. So a lot's happened in the past few months for WellBe and for me personally. First, we rebranded the WellBe podcast to the GetWellbe podcast because, well, first of all, our website and all of our social channels are getwellbe.com and @getwellbe. But also because it turns out the beginning of the word well-being is WellBe. So our amazing podcast gets lost in a sea of other wellness and well-being podcasts. So from now on, you can search Get WellBe in your podcast app to find this podcast easily, or even more easily, you can just subscribe and then you can always find it in your My Podcast section of your podcast app. A second big piece of news, you may have noticed that our last episode was published over a month ago, and that's because my husband, toddler, and I moved to Washington, D.C. from Connecticut in early January and became first-time homeowners. I hadn't packed up and moved in nearly 3 years, and I'd never done it with a child. Whoa, it's been a lot of work getting packed up and then unpacked and getting our new house set up, which had lots of fun broken things to fix, all while taking care of our son since we didn't have childcare. But we are settling in and starting to have a sense of normalcy. So today I bring you a brand new in-depth episode on antibiotics. So what's really the problem with taking antibiotics, where they are hidden in our food, how to prevent antibiotic resistance, and what to do if you really need to take an antibiotic prescription. For most of us in our lifetimes, antibiotics have become all too common. It's way too easy to ask for an antibiotic prescription when you feel a sniffle coming on, instead of waiting to see if you can kick it on your own or waiting for the results of a test to see if your cold is in fact bacterial or if it's just viral. But before we can understand when it's okay to take antibiotics and when we really need them, we need to understand how they work. So antibiotics are chemical substances, chemical meaning not from the earth, chemical substances that can inhibit or destroy, that's where the anti comes from, the growth of microorganisms. That's where the biotic comes from. Biotic literally means living things. They are produced either naturally by soil, bacteria, and fungi, or synthetically in a lab after going extensive testing. So when you receive an antibiotic prescription, this is synthetically created in a lab. Once antibiotics enter your system, they travel throughout the body killing bacteria. The thing is, though, they don't have the ability to differentiate between the bad disease-causing bacteria and the good nourishing bacteria that we really need for many functions in our body, most especially digesting our food. So while they were created with the idea of killing harmful microorganisms, it ends up being a massacre for all the different good and bad bacteria they encounter. This is where the harmful effects of antibiotics really come in. In many cases, antibiotics end up destroying the beneficial bacteria in our guts, organs, and tissues. This, in turn, affects our microbiome, the network of microbial species that have an outside impact on our physical and mental health. This effect is so profound that just 1 week-long course of antibiotics can change your microbiome for up to a full year after you stop taking that medication. In a healthy, balanced microbiome, there's about 85% good bacteria and 15% bad bacteria. One of the harmful effects of antibiotics is that when you take them, you upset this balance and you knock down the amount of good bacteria, and that ratio gets very out of whack, meaning the bad bacteria don't have as many good bacteria to keep them in check. So when your good bacteria levels drop, it can lead to a whole host of health issues such as increased inflammation, decreased cancer resistance, stress in your gut, weakened immune defenses. So what can you do to avoid upsetting this balance if you get sick? Well, first, make sure your doctor runs a test to confirm that your infection is bacterial and not viral. If it's a virus, like COVID or the flu, an antibiotic won't help anyway. If you have confirmation that your infection is bacterial and have also confirmed that there aren't other less aggressive or harmful alternatives that you could pursue to resolve it, make sure you don't leave that office until your doctor recommends a good probiotic for you based on your medical history. This can be anything from fermented foods such as sauerkraut or apple cider vinegar to prebiotic or probiotic pills or powders. Probiotics are good bacteria that help keep your digestive system healthy, while prebiotics are food for those probiotics. And both are key to maintaining a healthy microbiome. If you're getting chronic bacterial infections such as sinusitis or UTIs, there's a good chance your bad bacteria are ruling the roost in your gut and your good bacteria have been taken prisoner. Send in reinforcements, aka probiotics, to take back control of your health. And you really need prebiotics as well to make sure your probiotics are getting the food they need to survive. So for a full list of great prebiotic and probiotic foods and supplement options, as well as other ways to support your gut health, you can check out the getwellbe Gut Health Guide. It's a free guide that you can download on our site. And it's just chock full of not only great recommendations, but fantastic research with links that you can go and really dive deep into how all this works. One of the most concerning ways that antibiotics are being used began around 60 years ago, when scientists figured out that putting antibiotics in the feed or water of healthy cattle, hogs, and poultry helped them gain weight faster. This is because low doses of antibiotics alter the way animals break down food in their gut, enabling fat buildup. So I just want to pause and kind of reiterate this concept because it's pretty terrifying. So putting antibiotics in food or water helps you gain weight faster because the antibiotics alter the way you break down food in your gut, enabling fat buildup. So today, 40% of all global antibiotics are used in this way, even in fish farms. We'll be right back with more about antibiotics after this quick message. I don't know about you, but I never listen to the end of a podcast anymore. So I'm hopping in here to let you know that the best way to stay empowered and on top of your health is to be in the WellBe community. So head to getwellbe.com/subscribe to make sure you're in like Flynn. On getwellbe.com, you'll learn about our online programs to help you go deeper and make life-altering changes to your health, and our awesome non-toxic product database. If you're more of a social media person, let's be friends on Instagram. Find me at getwellbe. Okay, now back to this rather disturbing fact about the link between antibiotics and weight gain. So our first reaction to discovering this was, good thing we aren't getting antibiotics in our food or water. Oh wait, it turns out we are. Humans consume antibiotics not only through the meat we eat, but also through the water we drink. See, when you eat meat from an animal or a fish that's been fed antibiotics, your body absorbs that antibiotic. This has a few pretty bad consequences. First, studies suggest that this leads to the development of antibiotic-resistant bacteria in humans. Second, there's concern that our ability to fight off disease could be diminished by overuse of antibiotics in farm animals. And third, exposure to antibiotics from food may alter the balance of your gut. This last one means that weight gain is among the many harmful effects of antibiotics. In fact, research has shown that obese people's gut bacteria mix is different than that of lean people. And if you're thinking you're okay because you only eat organic meat or you don't eat meat at all, there's more. It's estimated that 75% of antibiotics delivered to an animal aren't even used. Instead, the drugs exit via their feces or urine. This contaminated manure eventually ends up in groundwater and surface water via runoff. Given that more than 50% of the world's population relies on groundwater for drinking water, this is a major concern. It's also interesting to note that the widespread use of antibiotics in livestock and their subsequent rapid weight gain coincides with the human obesity epidemic of the last 20 years. Because gut health is so important to overall health, the harmful effects of antibiotics on your health are pretty widespread. A 2015 study showed an increase of cancer formation, inflammation, and oxidative stress as a result of people taking antibiotics. Long-term antibiotics use at any age has been linked to a host of antibiotic-resistant issues later in life, including overgrowth of candida, which is yeast, which manifests itself as MS, or chronic pain, depression, severe allergies, and cancer. A super recent study showed that antibiotic use is associated with colon cancer. It's also worth noting that antibiotics can have the greatest negative effect when taken at a young age. That's because they can change the development of kids, adults' microbiota by not allowing it to develop normally. What that means is a child who took antibiotics frequently or ate a lot of meat that had antibiotics in it or water that had antibiotics in it will have a different and not so great microbiota or microbiome when they're adults. Early frequent use of antibiotics has been linked to Crohn's disease, diabetes, and obesity. Antibiotic resistance is a major global health problem. Each year, almost 3 million people are infected with antibiotic-resistant bacteria, and approximately 35,000 people die as a direct result, according to the CDC. That's pretty terrifying and definitely qualifies as a public health crisis. In fact, the Obama administration put together a task force to try to reduce the amount of antibiotic prescriptions given out each year. This task force has goals that they adjust every 5 years, and it's still very much in effect now. So how is antibiotic resistance created? How do superbugs relate to chronic disease? And what does it have to do with the meat that you eat and your health in the long run? Well, the US leads the world in antibiotic consumption per capita, meaning per person, we consume the most antibiotics. However, 30% of all the antibiotic prescriptions written are unnecessary. Even scarier, more than 70% of the bacteria that cause hospital infections are resistant to antibiotics, meaning the infection does not respond to antibiotic treatment of it. Antibiotic resistance occurs when a bacteria changes in some way that either protects it from the action of the drug or neutralizes the drug. Any bacteria that survives an antibiotic treatment by changing itself can then multiply and pass on its properties, making more bacteria that are immune to modern antibiotic medicines. So why is this happening? In short, it's because of this overuse of antibiotics. When you take one your body doesn't need, the drug will still attack good bacteria. The good bacteria can then become antibiotic resistant and spread that property to other more harmful bacteria. Plus, antibiotic-resistant bacteria biofilms, which are thin, slimy films of bacteria, are responsible for several chronic diseases that are difficult to treat, like cystic fibrosis. They can even coat the surfaces of implanted medical devices, such as catheters or prosthetic cardiac valves. Biofilms have been connected to 65 to 80% of bacterial infections in the US. In 2017, the World Health Organization warned that a dozen antibiotic-resistant superbugs pose a threat equivalent to terrorism. And that was even before the COVID-19 pandemic. If you're now wondering how to prevent antibiotic resistance, the simplest answer is by avoiding unnecessary antibiotics. And that doesn't just mean prescriptions. Over 30 million pounds of antibiotics are sold for use in food animals. That's 80% of the antibiotics sold in the US. Globally, it's estimated that antibiotic use will increase by 67% by 2030. That's in 7 years. Consuming these animal products promotes the spread of superbugs, which enter our homes through uncooked meat and fish. If contamination occurs, you could be infected with a life-threatening antibiotic-resistant illness. Sure makes the meat aisle of the grocery store and the fish counter a little more ominous, doesn't it? It's unknown how often people get sick from this, but we do know there are nearly 50 million cases of foodborne illness in the US each year, and it keeps climbing. To make sure you're not one of those cases, avoid consuming meat, poultry, fish, and other food products raised with antibiotics, and instead buy those that are certified organic, or in the case of fish, wild fish. Next, if you feel an infection coming on, don't just reach for an antibiotic prescription. Allow your body the chance to fight it off. Only about 2 to 6% of colds become bacterial sinus infections that could actually benefit from antibiotics anyway. The other 94 to 98% of sinus infections are caused by viruses, which means it can't be treated with antibiotics to begin with. Avoid antibacterial soaps and hand sanitizers as well, and instead use plain soap and water for effective hand washing. In the same vein, skip antibacterial wipes for surface cleaning and instead use non-antibacterial wipes if you want, or just a paper towel or a cloth and, water and some non-toxic surface cleaner. For a full list of vetted personal care and home cleaning products that don't contain antibiotics, and when you see the word antibacterial, that's the same thing as antibiotics, check out the getwellbe non-toxic product database. It is such a wonderful resource on getwellbe.com and just a wealth of great recommendations and information. All right, so that's it for today. Feels good to be back. I've missed you guys, and I've missed sharing this great information that I hope is very helpful. To read the written version of this guide with plenty of research links, head to getwellbe.com, and you can also find that link in the show notes. While you're on getwellbe.com, definitely become a Wellbe Insider to get our latest content weekly in your inbox. And if you haven't already and you found this episode helpful or interesting, subscribe to the podcast. And if you haven't, please leave a review. Scroll to the bottom of our podcast page and click write a review. You can leave a few words and a few stars and press submit. It's super fast and easy, but it really makes a difference for the Get Wellbe podcast to be found by others. All right, this is your host, Adrienne Nolan-Smith, and thanks again for listening to the Get Wellbe podcast.